90 pounds of German Shepherd hit the reinforced gate so hard the bolts sheared and two combat-trained handlers stumbled backward like men taking fire. 6 weeks, 5 handlers, 3 behaviorists, 1 dog nobody could touch. That morning, the Navy signed the paperwork to destroy him in 7 days. Then Chief Petty Officer Caleb Hayes walked into that kennel, sat down on the concrete 3 feet from those teeth, and did the one thing every expert on that base swore would get him killed. I did nothing at all. If this story grips you, subscribe and stay with me all the way to the end, and drop the name of the city you're watching from in the comments so I can see how far this story has traveled. The sound reached Caleb Hayes before he cleared the door. He had spent 11 years learning to sort sounds into categories: incoming, outgoing, threat. Not a threat, something breaking that could be fixed, something breaking that could not. He heard the noise coming out of the canine compound that morning, and his body filed it under the last category before his brain caught up. It wasn't barking. Barking was communication. This was something older than that, a low grinding sound that started somewhere under the ribs and came out through the teeth, and underneath it, the flat industrial crash of a living body throwing itself against steel. Master-at-Arms Grant Keller was standing in the corridor with a clipboard he wasn't reading and a coffee he wasn't drinking. He didn't turn around when Caleb's boots came up behind him. "Don't get closer than the yellow line, Chief." "How long has he been at it?" "Since 0400, Keller's voice had the sandpaper flatness of a man who had stopped being surprised weeks ago. "That's the 3rd gate this month. Maintenance is starting to ask questions I don't have answers for." Caleb stepped up to the line anyway. Through the reinforced mesh, he saw a dog he had known for 4 years and didn't recognize at all. Jack was 5 years old. Tan and black, the classic saddle, the coat that used to catch light like something polished. Now it was dull and matted along the flanks, not from neglect by the staff. The staff hosed that kennel twice a day at risk to their own hands, but from an animal that had simply stopped caring whether he was clean-fed or alive. The muscle was still there. That was the thing that turned Caleb's stomach. Every ounce of it coiled under the skin, 39 kilos of purpose-built predator. But it wasn't aimed anywhere. It fired at nothing. A door closed 2 buildings away, and the whole animal detonated sideways into the wall. 5 handlers, Keller said. "You want the list?" "Give me the list." Peterson lasted 2 days. Wouldn't go back in. Ochoa made it 4, said the dog was fine right up until he wasn't. Reyes never got the leash on. Tan got bit through a glove and didn't report it, which is its own conversation. And Vega. Keller finally looked at him. Vega's still in medical. 23 stitches, forearm, 2 tendons nicked. Dog pinned him against the wall and held him there 6 minutes. Not chewing, holding. What did Vega do wrong? Keller laughed once, and there was nothing in it. That's the part that keeps me up. Nothing. Textbook. Soft voice blade stance, no direct eye, hand low and open. He did it the way you'd teach it at a schoolhouse. He shook his head slowly. Jack let him get inside 2 feet. Let him. And then went for the arm like Vega was a squirter coming through a doorway. Caleb didn't answer. He was looking at the hook mounted outside the kennel run. The tactical harness hung there. Coyote Brown warned pale at the stress points, the lift handle frayed where a man's fist had grabbed it 1,000 times. Stitched across the side panel in block letters, K9 Jack. Nobody had put it on him in 6 weeks. Nobody had gotten close enough. "He knows it's there," Keller said, following his eyes. "First few days he'd stand under it and just look up. Now he won't face that side of the run at all." Inside the kennel, Jack stopped pacing. He turned his head and locked onto Caleb through the mesh, and every hair along his spine came up in a ridge. Caleb felt his own pulse jump, an honest animal jolt he didn't bother to be ashamed of. He'd had a rifle barrel put in his face in Ramadi, and it hadn't done that, but he held the eye contact 1 second longer than was smart because he needed to see it, and he saw it. Under the rage, under the wild-blown black pupils and the lifted lip and the tremor running through their shoulders, something searching, something scanning the room over and over and over for the one shape that wasn't there and never would be again. Caleb had seen that exact expression before. He saw it every morning in the mirror while he shaved. There had been a time, and it was not a long time ago, that was the obscenity of it when SEAL platoons put in requests for this dog by name. Not by kennel number, by name. 27 confirmed explosive finds across 3 deployments. Any one of them a funeral that never happened. Jack could clear a two-story structure in under half the time of any other detection dog on the East Coast, and he did it without the frantic scattergun energy most of them carried. He worked like an old man doing a crossword, methodical, unhurried, right. He could take a human scent through rain and hold it. He had once tracked a squirter 11 kilometers over broken ground in the dark and put himself between the man and the team without a command being given because he had already read the geometry and understood that if he waited for the word, somebody was going to die. His handler had been Senior Chief Owen Brady. Everyone on the teams called him Anvil because he was 6'2" of unbudgeable Irish stubbornness and because in 8 years nobody had ever seen anything move him off a position he'd decided to hold. Caleb had called him Owen. That was the whole distinction, and it mattered. They'd come up together, same buds class, same first deployment, sharing a bunk that was more of a shelf arguing about baseball at 2 in the morning like it was theology. Caleb was the one who went through doors. Owen was the one who sent Jack ahead so that the doors Caleb went through wouldn't kill him. Somewhere around year 6, they'd stopped counting who owed whom. It had become a permanent condition like weather. And then there was Sulu. Caleb didn't have to close his eyes for it. That was the thing nobody warned you about. It didn't require darkness or quiet or a bottle. It ran on its own schedule behind whatever else he happened to be looking at all day, every day. Beach extraction, 0310, hostage recovery on a spit of an island that didn't have a name worth learning. The intelligence was wrong, not incomplete. Wrong. Somebody in an air-conditioned room had put a stamp on a piece of paper and 1,100 miles away. 3 positions opened up on a beach at the exact moment the team was most naked. Caleb was 15 feet away when Owen went down. 15 feet. He had measured it later in his head over and over the way you press a bruise. 5 paces, 2 seconds, less than that at a sprint. He heard the rounds hit. That was the detail he had never told anybody. Not the corpsman, not the chaplain, not the doctor with the kind voice and the clipboard. He heard them hit, a sound like someone slapping a wet coat. And then no scream, no cry, just a sudden absence of movement that was somehow louder than everything else on that beach. And he heard Jack. Not a bark. A whine high cracked open the sound of an animal who understood what had happened a full 4 seconds before any human being on that stretch of sand did. The dog planted himself over Owen's body and did not move. The team leader screamed the extraction order twice. Jack did not move. Rounds came in from 3 angles and took chunks out of the sand, a hand's width from his ribs, and Jack pressed himself down over his handler and did not move. And when they finally dragged them both out under covering fire, they had to pull the dog off with 2 men and a sling. Owen was gone before they got him to the boat. Jack came home without a scratch on him, not one. That was the part the vets kept circling back to in the file. Physically unremarkable. No injury consistent with reported engagement. 6 weeks of tests looking for a wound, and every scan came back clean, and the dog kept trying to kill everyone who came near him, and nobody in the entire apparatus of naval special warfare could put those 2 facts in the same sentence and make them work. Caleb could. He'd come home without a scratch, too. Keller waited until Caleb stepped back from the yellow line before he said it. Command signed it this morning. Caleb turned. Signed what? Don't make me say it in the hallway, Chief. Say it. Keller pulled a folded sheet out from under the clipboard, and he did it slowly like the paper weighed something. Final disposition authorization. Behavioral euthanasia, 7 days. The corridor got very quiet. Somewhere down the row, another dog was barking at nothing the ordinary sound of an ordinary kennel, and it seemed obscene. 7 days, Caleb said. They gave him everything, and I mean everything. 2 behaviorists from Lackland flew out. Doc Adler put him on trazodone, then gabapentin, then a combination that would have flattened a horse. Enrichment protocol, reduced stimulus housing, 6 weeks of rest with 0 training demand. Keller's jaw worked. Yesterday, he went through a reinforced leather muzzle in 3 minutes 40. I timed it because nobody was going to believe me. He's suffering. Yeah, he is. Everybody down here can see it. That's the part nobody says out loud. Keller rubbed his face with one hand. Chief, I've been doing this 19 years. I've put down dogs that were mean. I never put down one that was sad. And I don't have a box to check for that. So the kindest thing, don't. Caleb's voice came out lower than he meant it to, and Keller actually straightened up. Don't tell me the kindest thing is killing a dog whose entire crime was refusing to leave his handler. Keller didn't argue. He looked at the paper in his hand like he wished it would catch fire. "Then you tell me what the alternative is," he said quietly, "because every credentialed expert on this installation has tried, and that animal has given every single one of them the exact same answer. Get away from me, or I'll take your arm off." Caleb looked back through the mesh. Jack had stopped moving entirely. He was standing dead center in the run head, low shoulders, bunched weight forward on the front feet. Not aggression posture. Not exactly. It was the posture of something waiting for an attack it was certain was coming from a direction it had already given up on identifying. "I want custody," Caleb said. Keller blinked. "You want what?" "Temporary personal custody. Give me the 7 days." Chief, that dog put Vega in medical. And Vega has been handling working dogs since before you had a rate. You're not even a handler." "No." "So what exactly is your qualification here?" Caleb kept his eyes on the kennel. "I was 15 feet away the night his handler died," he said, "and I've been carrying the same thing he's carrying ever since." Keller opened his mouth, then closed it. Something moved across his face, not agreement. Recognition, the look of a man who has just realized the argument in front of him is coming from a place that outranks the argument he was about to make. "Talk to Captain Doyle," he said. "It's his signature on the bottom. It's his to unsign." Captain Walter Doyle had 31 years in the Navy and the posture of a man who intended to spend the next 30 making sure nobody forgot a single one of them. He let Caleb get all the way through it without interrupting once, which was either an excellent sign or the specific kind of silence that comes right before a detonation. "Let me confirm I've understood you," Doyle said. "You are requesting temporary personal custody of a military working dog currently classified as a danger to handling personnel." "Yes, sir." "An animal that has hospitalized 3 experienced canine personnel in 6 weeks." "Yes, sir." "An animal that 2 board-certified veterinary behaviorists have independently assessed as non-rehabilitatable." "They're wrong, sir." Doyle's eyes came up off the desk and settled on him, and the temperature in the office dropped about 10 degrees. "That is an extraordinarily bold statement," he said, "from a man with precisely 0 canine handling credentials." "I'm not claiming credentials, sir. I'm claiming familiarity." "Explain the distinction to me, slowly." "I deployed with that dog's handler 4 times. I've watched Jack work in conditions that would break most animals on this base noise heat altitude. And one night in a sandstorm where he found a pressure plate by feel because he couldn't smell anything at all." Caleb kept his hands at his sides and his voice level, and it cost him something. "And I was present at Sulu, sir. I was on that beach." Doyle said nothing. "He didn't come back broken because he's aggressive," Caleb said. "He came back broken because he lost the only person he had ever trusted, and in 6 weeks not one single individual has approached him with any goal except making him convenient again. And you can do better than the behaviorists. I lost the same man he lost, sir, in the same place, on the same night." Caleb's throat tightened, and he pushed straight through it. "So yes, I think I understand what's wrong with him better than anyone holding a clipboard." The clock on the wall ticked. Caleb counted 12 of them. 12 seconds felt like an unreasonable amount of time to stand at attention. Doyle leaned back. "7 days," he said. Caleb's chest moved. "Sir, I'm not finished. 7 days, and I want you to hear the conditions with both ears, Chief, because I will not repeat them." He held up one finger. "If that animal shows measurable documented improvement, and I don't mean he seemed calmer, I mean improvement, Keller will sign his name to, I will extend the window." Second finger, "If he injures you, I process the paperwork the same afternoon." Third finger, "If he injures a civilian, I process the paperwork, and then I process yours." He leaned forward across the desk. "And Chief Hayes understands something. If this goes sideways, it lands on you, not on the DAW, not on the program, not on the memory of Senior Chief Brady, who I knew, and who I liked, and whose name I would prefer not to see attached to a disaster." His voice dropped. "Are we tracking?" "Tracking, sir." "Then get out of my office before I remember I have judgment." Okay. Caleb didn't go to the kennel first. He went to medical. Petty Officer Second Class Danny Vega was sitting up in a chair by the window with his forearm wrapped from wrist to elbow in a paperback he clearly wasn't reading. He was 28 years old, and he had the specific hollow look of somebody who had recently had a belief taken away from him. You're the seal, Vega said. Word travels. Word's fast down here. Word says you asked Doyle for that dog. Vega laughed and then winced because laughing pulled something. Man, okay, you want my professional opinion? I want your honest one. Vega set the book down. He didn't want to hurt me, he said. Caleb went very still. Say that again. I've been bit 11 times, Chief, 11. I know what a dog looks like when it's committed. Vega turned his wrapped arm over slowly like the memory lived in it. He had me against the wall, 6 minutes, full mouth on my forearm, and my whole body weight was nothing to him. I might as well have been furniture. He looked up. He could have shifted grip any time he wanted. He could have gone for the inside of the elbow. He could have shaken. He didn't do any of it. He just held me, and he wasn't even looking at me. What was he looking at? The door, Vega said. The whole 6 minutes. He was watching the door. Caleb felt the floor tilt slightly under him. He wasn't attacking you, he said. No. Vega's voice cracked on it just slightly, and he covered it by clearing his throat. I've had 6 weeks to think about this, and I've decided I don't care if it sounds stupid. He wasn't attacking me. He was holding a casualty in place. He was doing exactly what he was trained to do when somebody goes down and you can't move them yet. Neither man said anything for a moment. They're putting him down Friday week, Vega said finally. I know. 23 stitches, and I'll tell you the truth, Chief, I'd take 23 more if it meant somebody figured him out. He picked the book back up and stared at a page. Don't let them do it because of my arm. That's all I've got to say. Don't let my arm be the reason. Caleb went back to the compound at 14:20 that afternoon with a folding chair. Keller watched him carry it down the corridor and said, That's not a plan. It's not. What do you want me to write in the log? Write down exactly what happens, Caleb said. Every minute of it, whatever it is. He set the chair down 3 feet from the mesh inside the yellow line, which made Keller swear quietly behind him, and he sat down and he put his hands on his knees. And then he did nothing. He didn't talk. He didn't reach. He didn't click his tongue or make the soft coaxing noises that every single one of the 5 previous handlers had made in the first 90 seconds. He didn't make eye contact. He picked a point about 6 inches to the left of the dog's shoulder and let his gaze rest there, soft, unfocused, and he worked on his breathing the way he'd been taught to work on it with a sniper rifle. In, hold, out. Slower than felt natural. Jack came off the back wall immediately. The growl started low and did not stop. It ran continuously without a break for breath, a sound that seemed to come out of the concrete rather than the animal. Every muscle in Caleb's body wanted to stand up. 11 years of training screamed at him that sitting stationary 3 feet from an unrestrained threat was the single stupidest thing he had ever done in a career that included jumping out of aircraft in the dark. He stayed in the chair. Minute 11, Jack charged the gate. He came at it flat out, 40 kilos, no windup, and hit the steel 18 inches from Caleb's face. The whole frame boomed. Caleb's body jerked. He couldn't stop that. Nothing could stop that, but his feet didn't move, and his hands stayed on his knees, and afterward, he sat there with his heart slamming and the ringing in his ears and did not get up. Down the corridor, somebody said, Jesus. Jack backed off 2 steps, waited, charged again. Same result. Minute 40. The pacing started. Back and forth, the tight, relentless circuit of an animal trying to outrun something that lived inside its own skull. 6 steps one way, turn, 6 steps back. Caleb counted 140 repetitions before he made himself stop counting because it was starting to do something to him. Minute 68, the growl broke. It didn't stop. It broke a hitch in the middle, a half second where the sound lost its footing, and then it picked up again, a little lower than before. Caleb didn't move. He felt something crawl up his spine that had nothing to do with fear. Hour 2, Jack retreated to the far corner and stood there, and for the first time the eyes changed function. Up until then, they had been running threat assessment, cycling cataloging, checking angles. Now they just watched, and there was confusion in it, real visible confusion. This one isn't leaving. This one isn't reaching. This one isn't talking at me or grabbing at me or trying to make me be something. Caleb understood exactly what was happening because 11 months earlier, he had sat in a chair in a small office while a very kind woman asked him how he was coping, and he had wanted to put his fist through the drywall. Not because she was wrong, but because every single question was an instruction to be somewhere other than where he was. Nobody had just sat with him either. Hour 3 minute 9. Jack lay down. Not relaxed, not remotely. Sphinx position weight forward, ready to launch, eyes still locked on. But then behind Caleb, Keller made a sound that wasn't a word. 19 years, he said very quietly. I've never, Chief, he has not laid down in the presence of a human being since they brought him back. Not once. He sleeps, standing against the wall. Caleb didn't answer because his throat had closed and he didn't trust it. He sat there another 20 minutes. Then he stood up slowly. No drama, the way you'd stand up from a table, and folded the chair. And he walked away. He got 4 steps. Behind him from inside the kennel came a sound. Not a growl, not a bark, a whine, short, sharp, completely involuntary, punched out of the animal before any part of him could decide whether to allow it. Caleb stopped. He stood in the middle of that corridor with a folding chair in his hand and his eyes shut, and something cracked open in his chest that he had been holding, welded shut since the night he knelt on wet sand next to his best friend and listened to the place where a heartbeat used to be. 6 weeks. 6 weeks of driving every living thing away, and now the dog was confused about why this one had left. I'll be back tomorrow, Caleb said. He didn't turn around when he said it. He mounted to the parking lot before his hands started shaking. He sat in the truck for 11 minutes with his forehead against the back of his hands on the steering wheel and didn't start the engine. Here was the arithmetic. 7 days, minus today. 6. 5 handlers had failed. 3 behaviorists had failed. A pharmaceutical protocol that would sedate livestock had failed. The entire institutional machinery of Naval Special Warfare's canine program had thrown itself at this problem for a month and a half and produced 23 stitches, 2 destroyed gates, 1 shredded muzzle, and a signature on a form. And Caleb Hayes had gotten a dog to lie down for 11 minutes. That was not going to be enough. He knew it in the way you know the weather is going to turn. Whatever he had done in that chair, it had reached the outer wall of the thing. It had not gone in, and he had 6 days to find something that would go in, and he had no idea what that was because everything he knew how to do was training, command structure, pressure, release, and every one of those tools was a hand reaching toward an animal who had learned that hands take things away. He needed something that wasn't a tool, and that was when he thought about Owen sitting on the floor of a team room at 2 in the morning after a mission that had gone wrong with Jack draped half across his legs, saying something Caleb hadn't thought about in 3 years. Everybody wants to fix him. He doesn't need fixing, brother. Dogs don't get fixed. They get witnessed. Caleb had laughed at him. He remembered laughing. He remembered saying, "Listen to yourself, you sound like a bumper sticker," and Owen throwing a sock at his head. He wasn't laughing now. He pulled the file Keller had let him photocopy out of the passenger seat and went through it in the parking lot with the door open and 1 boot on the asphalt. Intake sheets, vet notes, behavioral assessments in language so hedged it barely committed to the dog being a dog, medication logs, incident reports, 5 of them, each one shorter and flatter than the last. The prose of people who had stopped hoping. And at the very back, misfiled out of sequence, a training log page in handwriting, Owen's handwriting, dated 9 days before Sulu. Caleb's hands went cold. It was routine. That was the terrible part. Detection reps, 3 sets all satisfactory. Weight noted. A remark about a cracked pad on the right rear healing well. And then in the notes field at the bottom, in the cramped scrawl of a man filling out a form he assumed nobody would ever read. Off today. Wouldn't settle in the kennel. Sat with him. 40 minnow commands, no contact. Came around on his own. Note for next handler. When he's like this, do not work him. Do not correct. Just be in the room. He'll come to you when he can. Takes as long as it takes. Note for next handler. Caleb read it 4 times. Owen Brady had written the instructions. I had written them down 9 days before he died in a field on a form, and then the form had gone into a folder, and the folder had gone into a cabinet. And for 6 weeks, a rotating cast of certified professionals had walked past that cabinet on their way to try every single technique that Owen had explicitly said not to use. Caleb put the page down on the seat very carefully like it might tear. Then he put both hands over his face and made a sound in that truck that he would not have made in front of another human being. He drove. He didn't decide to. He got on 264 heading south, and by the time he understood where he was going, He was already 20 minutes down the road, out past the last of the strip malls into the flat green. Nothing where Virginia Beach stops pretending to be a city. Pungo. He hadn't been out here since the funeral. That was 14 months, and he did the math against his will in 9 days. Lieutenant Michael Quinn had died on a beach, too, if you wanted to be technical about it, though the beach had been a different ocean, and the classification level meant Caleb couldn't say the country's name out loud even to himself. Michael had gone out with his Malinois Ranger, and neither of them had come back, and the details of it would stay in a vault for another 30 years. Michael had been the one who taught Caleb how to read a working dog in the first place, long before Owen. Michael Quinn had sat on the floor of a team room with his back against a pelican case and talked about fear, like it was something that deserved respect instead of shame. And half the men in that room had thought he was strange, and every one of them had come to him privately at some point to ask a question they didn't want to ask anyone else. And at Michael's memorial, standing in a rented hall with a plastic cup of terrible coffee, Caleb had put a hand on Sarah Quinn's shoulder and said the sentence, the one everybody says, anything you need, anything at all, I mean it. He'd meant it. That was the thing, he'd absolutely meant it. Then Sulu happened 4 months later, and Caleb Hayes went into a hole in the ground and pulled the hole in after him, and he had not called that house one single time in 14 months. His hands tightened on the wheel. There was a girl in that house, Emma. She'd been 7 at the funeral in a dress that was slightly too big, holding her mother's hand and not crying, looking around the room at all. Those enormous men in dress blues with an expression Caleb had never been able to put a word to and had thought about probably 40 times since. She'd be 8 now. Michael used to bring dogs home. Broken ones washouts, animals other handlers had given up on. He told Caleb about it once with a beer in his hand and something proud and slightly bewildered in his face. I don't do anything. I put them in the yard and my daughter sits down and that's it. That's the whole program. Kids got something. I've been doing this 12 years and I've got nothing on an 8-year-old with a tennis ball. Caleb turned off the highway. I didn't have a plan. He had a photocopied page in his passenger seat in a dead man's handwriting and 6 days in a memory of a promise he had broken through nothing worse than cowardice. He slowed as the mailbox came up on the right, and then he saw the truck. Gray pickup parked on the shoulder across from the driveway, nose pointed away, engine running. Windows dark enough that the law probably had an opinion about them. It was not parked at a house. There was no house on that side of the road for 400 meters in either direction. It was just sitting there on a rural shoulder at 1640 on a Tuesday afternoon with a clear line of sight to the Quinn front door. Caleb's foot came off the accelerator. 11 years of a very specific kind of work stood up inside him all at once and said in a voice with no emotion in it whatsoever that is surveillance. He glanced at the mirror to get the plate. The gray truck pulled off the shoulder unhurried and drove away. Caleb sat in the middle of an empty road with his hands on the wheel and his heart going hard, and every instinct he had was telling him something he didn't have a single piece of evidence for. Then the front door of the house opened, and Sarah Quinn stepped out onto the porch, and she was looking straight at his truck, like she'd been expecting somebody for a long time and had stopped believing it would be him. She didn't say hello. She said, 14 months, Caleb. He got out of the truck with the photocopied page still in his hand and no idea what to do with his face. I know. Do you? It wasn't a question. Sarah Quinn had gotten thinner since the funeral in the way grief thins people who refuse to lie down under it, and there was something sharpened along her jaw that hadn't been there before. You said anything I need. You said it holding a cup of coffee you didn't drink. I did. And then nothing. She folded her arms. You want to know the worst part? I didn't even take it personally. That's how many of you said it. 11, 12 guys. Every single one meant it. Not one of you called. Caleb stood at the bottom of the steps and took it because there was no version of this where he got to defend himself. You're right, he said. There's no excuse. I could give you a reason, but a reason isn't an excuse and you'd smell the difference in about 4 seconds. Something in her shoulders dropped an inch. Michael used to say that exact thing. She rubbed her eyes with the heel of her hand. God, okay, come up. You're letting the bugs in and you're not even inside yet. He didn't come up. He said, who was in the gray truck? Sarah stopped moving. It was fast, half a second, maybe less. But Caleb had spent 11 years reading exactly that half second on people's faces in doorways, and he saw everything in it. Recognition, then calculation. then the shutter coming down. "What gray truck?" she said. "Parked across the road when I came in. Engine running. No house on that side." He kept his voice flat. "Sarah." "Who was it?" "Somebody turning around." "For how long?" "Caleb." "How long has somebody been turning around in front of your house?" She looked at him for a long moment, and he watched her decide not to tell him, and it landed in his gut like a dropped weight. "You came out here for something," she said. "It wasn't my driveway. So say what you came to say, and then we'll see." He held her eyes another second. Then he let it go for now, and only because pushing would end the conversation, and he needed this conversation more than he needed the answer. "There's a dog," he said to her. She listened to all of it in the kitchen, standing hands wrapped around a mug she never lifted. He gave her the truth, all of it unsanded. 23 stitches in a man's forearm, 2 destroyed gates, a muzzle chewed through in 3 minutes and 40 seconds. 5 handlers who quit, and 3 specialists who wrote him off in language, so careful it barely admitted the dog existed. The signature on the disposition form, 6 days. He told her about the beach in the version that wasn't classified. He told her that Jack had stood over Owen Brady's body under fire and refused to move, and that they'd had to pull him off with a sling. And then he put the photocopied page on her table and turned it around so she could read it. Sarah read it once, then again. Her thumb moved across Owen's handwriting like she was checking whether the ink was wet. "He wrote the instructions," she said, 9 days before. "And nobody read it. Nobody read it." She set the mug down very carefully, and Caleb realized her hand wasn't steady. "Michael wrote things like this," she said. "Notes for the next guy." He had a whole notebook. "He used to say the dog outlives the handler 9 times out of 10, and everything you learned about him dies with you unless you write it down." She laughed, and it came out wrong. "He wrote it down, Caleb. He wrote down everything, and then he—" She stopped, put both palms flat on the counter, breathed. "Okay," she said. "So what do you want from me?" "Michael used to bring dogs home." "Yes. He told me his daughter fixed them." "That is not what he said." Sarah's head came up sharply. "I guarantee you that is not the sentence that came out of his mouth. He said she sat with them. He was very specific about that, and he was specific about it because it mattered to him. And if you walk into my yard thinking there's a trick my 8-year-old does, you can get back in your truck right now." Caleb didn't flinch. "That's why I'm here," he said, "because it's not a trick. Because your husband and my best friend, independently, wrote down the same instruction, and the entire United States Navy has spent 6 weeks doing the opposite of it." Sarah stared at him. Then she walked to the window over the sink and looked out at the backyard for a while without saying anything. "He's killed nothing," she said finally. "For no fatalities." "None. Vega, the one with the stitches, Vega thinks he wasn't even biting him. Thinks he was holding him. Casualty hold." "Do you think that—" "I think a dog with that jaw who wanted a man dead would have him dead," Caleb said. 23 stitches is a message. It isn't an attempt." Sarah kept looking out the window, and Caleb watched her shoulders, and he saw the moment she stopped being a widow and became something harder and more practical, and it was honestly a little frightening. "Here's what happens," she said. "You bring him. Early before it gets hot, before the road noise starts. He stays on a line the entire time, and you hold the line, not me, not her. Emma sits where I can see her from the door, and I will be standing at that door the entire time. And Caleb," she turned around, "I want you to hear this part with your whole face. If that dog moves wrong, I don't care what he's been through. I don't care what Owen wrote. I will not hesitate. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" "Yes." "Say it back. If he moves wrong, you end it." "Good." She picked up the mug and finally drank from it and made a face because it had gone cold. 7 tomorrow. She gets up at 6 anyway." Caleb nodded and turned toward the door. "Caleb," he stopped. 14 months, Sarah said, "and the thing that finally brought you out here was a dog." "Yeah. Michael would think that was hilarious," she said, and something went through her voice that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite the other thing. "Go home. You look like you haven't slept since the funeral." I didn't go home. He went back to the base and sat in the corridor outside Jack's run until 2200 with a folding chair and a page in a dead man's handwriting. And the dog paced for the first hour and stood for the second and lay down for the third. At 2140, Jack put his chin on his paws. Caleb didn't move a muscle. He sat there in a dark kennel corridor with his heart going like he was on a rooftop and thought, okay, there it is. At 2151, a door slammed somewhere in the building, and the dog came off the floor like a mine going off and hit the mesh, and Caleb's chair went over backward, and Keller came around the corner at a dead run with his hand on his radio. Chief, you good, you good. Caleb picked himself up off the concrete with his ears ringing. I'm good. You're bleeding. I hit the wall. It's the wall. He set the chair back up. Grant, 10 minutes ago he had his chin down. Keller stared at him. Write it in the log, Caleb said. The next morning it took 41 minutes to get Jack into the truck. Not 41 minutes of stroll. 41 minutes of Caleb standing in a kennel run with a long line clipped to a slow-up lead and a tailgate open at the other end of a hallway doing absolutely nothing, while a 90-pound animal decided whether the open door was an escape or a trap. On got 2 fingers on the harness, the coyote brown one, with K9 Jack stitched into the panel which Keller had handed him at 0630 with the expression of a man passing over a live grenade, and Jack spun and took the sleeve of his camis off at the elbow. Not the arm, the sleeve. Caleb looked down at the strip of fabric hanging off his forearm and up at the dog standing 6 feet away with his lip lifted and his sides heaving. Yeah, he said quietly. I know, it smells like him. I'm sorry. He carried the harness instead of putting it on. He'd carry it the whole way. The drive was worse. Jack jammed himself into the far corner of the passenger footwell and growled continuously for 38 minutes at the turn signal, at the tire noise at a motorcycle 4 lanes over, at the specific frequency the truck made going over expansion joints. Caleb drove one-handed with the line wrapped twice around his fist and talked about nothing the entire way in a voice with no command in it at all, the way you'd talk to somebody in shock. At 0703, he pulled into the Quinn driveway. He came around and opened the door, and Jack hit the ground, already working. It was not exploration. Caleb had watched 100 dogs get out of 100 vehicles, and this wasn't any of them. Jack went out to the length of the line and started running a perimeter fence tree-line driveway mouth back to the truck again. Fast, low checking angles, and Caleb realized with a sick lurch what he was watching. The dog was clearing the property. I was setting security on a beach in the Sulu Sea that had stopped existing 8 weeks ago. The line went taut, and Caleb dug his heels in and got dragged 4 feet through gravel. Easy, he said. Easy, hey. Jack didn't hear him. Jack hadn't heard a human voice in 6 weeks. And then from behind them, hi, Jack. 2 words. Not loud, not high and sweet the way people talk to dogs. Just flat and ordinary and completely unafraid the way you'd greet somebody you already knew. Jack froze mid-stride. Everything stopped. The whole animal locked 1 foot still off the ground, ribs stopped at mid-breath, and his ears rotated backward toward the sound, a full second before his head followed. Caleb didn't dare breathe. Emma Quinn was standing about 10 feet away at the corner of the house, in jeans and sneakers, with the laces undone, holding a tennis ball so old the fuzz had worn off in patches. She was small for 8. She had her father's eyes, and Caleb had genuinely forgotten how much that was going to hurt. She didn't come closer. She didn't put a hand out. She sat down in the grass right there cross-legged and put her palm flat on the ground beside her knee, open and empty. Sarah was in the doorway behind the screen with both hands on the frame. Emma, Caleb said very quietly, not 1 inch closer than that. Understand me? I know, Emma said without taking her eyes off the dog. Dad said the first time you always sit and you always let them do the walking. Jack was still frozen. Then the growl started, low grinding, exactly the sound that had emptied a kennel corridor for 6 weeks, and Caleb's hand tightened on the line, and he felt his whole body get ready to do something violent. Emma didn't move. You don't have to guard right now, she said. There's nobody bad here. I'm going to put the ball down. Okay, it's not for now. It's just so you know where it is. She set the tennis ball on the grass in front of her knees, and the growl broke. Not stopped, broke. The same hitch Caleb had heard in the kennel, a half second where the sound lost its grip, and then it came back thinner. And then it hitched again. And then it wasn't a growl at all, it was just breathing hard and ragged and too fast. Jack took a step. Caleb's vision went narrow at the edges. He had the line. He had the line, and he had 39 kilos of trained working dog and a child sitting on the ground 8 feet away, and if he had misjudged this, if he had gotten this one thing wrong. Another step. He's okay, Emma said, and it took Caleb a second to understand she was talking to him. Mr. Caleb, he's okay. You're squeezing the rope and he can feel it. Caleb looked down at his own fist, white-knuckled on the line. He forced it open one finger at a time. Jack took the last 3 steps. He stood directly over her. His head was level with hers. That was the thing. 90 pounds of him, standing over a little girl sitting in the grass. And his breath was coming in short, sharp bursts, and his eyes, those black, blown-open eyes that had put 3 men in medical, locked onto her face and held. And then Jack lowered his head and put it in her lap. The sound that came out of him took Caleb Hayes apart. It wasn't a whine, it was a wail, cracked open, shaking, wrenched out of the chest with enough force that the dog's whole body convulsed with it, and it went on and on. And it was the single most human noise Caleb had ever heard an animal make. 6 weeks of held grief, finally finding a place safe enough to exist. Jack pressed into her and shook. His front feet scraped the grass. His breath hitched and caught and hitched again. And Emma Quinn put both small hands on his ears, the way her father had shown her before she could read, and stroked slow and didn't say anything at all for a long moment. Then quietly, I know, it's okay. Caleb turned around and put his fist against his mouth. I was 35 years old, and he had not cried at Owen Brady's funeral or at Michael Quinn's, and he stood in that yard with a slack line in his hand and his back to everybody, and lost that fight completely. Behind the screen door, Sarah slid down until she was sitting on the floor of her own hallway with her hand over her face, making no sound at all. Nobody moved for 11 minutes. That was the number Caleb would remember later, because at some point he'd started counting to keep himself from coming apart entirely. 11 minutes with a war dog's head in an 8-year-old's lap. Then Emma said in a completely normal voice, Mom, he's heavy. And Sarah made a sound behind the door that was half laugh and half something else. And Caleb wiped his face with his torn sleeve and turned around and said, Yeah, he's about 90. That's more than me. That's more than you. He can stay there, though, Emma said. My leg's asleep, but I don't mind. He brought the dog back the next morning and the morning after that. The base was 6 days from putting Jack down, and Caleb spent those days doing what looked to any credentialed observer like absolutely nothing. Day 5, Emma read out loud. She hauled a paperback out onto the back steps, an adventure novel with a cracked spine and a boy on the cover. Holding a lantern, and read 40 minutes of it, in a flat, unhurried, occasionally stumbling, 8-year-old voice, mispronouncing archipelago 3 different ways. Jack lay 6 feet from her with his chin on his paws and his eyes tracking her voice like it was a scent trail. Caleb watched from the porch. That's the one, Sarah said beside him. Michael read her that one before every trip. Same book. She's read it maybe 40 times. Does she know why she picked it? I don't think she picks anything, Sarah said. I think she just does the thing that worked before and doesn't ask why it worked. That's the whole gift. She's 8. She hasn't learned to overthink it yet. Day 6, the ball. Emma rolled it, not through, rolled slow along the ground where he could watch it the entire way, and Jack looked at it for 11 seconds like it was a problem in a language he used to speak. Then he got up. He walked over, picked it up in his mouth, carried it back, and dropped it at her feet. Caleb stood up so fast he knocked the porch chair over. He picked it up, he said. Sarah, he picked something up. I saw. You don't understand. 6 weeks. 6 weeks, and the only thing he's put in his mouth is a leather muzzle in Danny Vega's forearm. His voice was doing something he couldn't control. He's playing. He's not playing, Sarah said. Caleb looked at her. He's remembering, she said. There's a difference and it matters. She's not teaching him anything. She's giving him permission to remember that not everything in the world is coming for him. She kept her eyes on the yard. That's what she did for me, too. First 4 months after Michael, I wasn't here, Caleb. I was making lunches like a machine. And one night she climbed in bed and said, Mom, you're allowed to be sad, 8 years old. Caleb didn't say anything. So don't call it a trick, Sarah said. And don't call it a gift either. It's just that nobody else in her life is trying to manage her, including me. I gave up. Somewhere in those days, without any single moment, Caleb could point at Jack, started letting him exist. It went through Emma. That was the thing he'd never have predicted. She'd sit between them in the grass with one hand on the dog's head and the other resting on her knee near Caleb's boot. And Jack would look from her to him and back over and over like he was triangulating, like he was checking her face for a ruling on whether this man was in or out. On day 6, Jack fell asleep, all the way asleep on his side feet, twitching in a yard with 2 adults and a child in it. Caleb sat very still and watched a dog sleep and felt something in his own chest unclench that had been locked since March. Then the mail truck went by out on the road and Jack came off the ground in a half second and hit the end of nothing, no line. They had stopped using the line on day 5 and stood there rigid, staring at the driveway, mouth hackles up in a solid ridge from his shoulders to his tail. Not at the mail truck, past it, down the road. He held it for 4 minutes and 20 seconds, and he did not blink, and the low sound in his chest wasn't the grief sound. It was something else entirely. "What's he looking at?" Emma asked. Nobody answered her. Caleb walked out to the end of the driveway. There was nothing there. Empty road, heat coming off the asphalt. But there were tire marks on the gravel shoulder across from the mailbox, and they were fresh. And there were a lot of them layered over each other, the marks of a vehicle that had pulled onto the same patch of shoulder over and over and over again. He crouched down and put 2 fingers on them and stayed there a long moment. Then he went back to the porch and said in a voice he kept very level, "Sarah, come inside a minute." She stood at the sink with her back to him, which was how he knew. "You want to ask me about truck again," she said. "I want you to tell me about the truck." "It's nothing." "Sarah, it's family, okay?" She turned around and her eyes were bright and furious. "It's family and it's humiliating and I'm handling it." Caleb pulled out a chair and sat down because standing over her was going to make this worse. "How long?" Sarah's jaw worked. 14 months, she said. Caleb felt the floor go out from under him for the second time in a week. 14, Sarah, that's since the funeral. 3 weeks after. She laughed and it was awful. 3 weeks after we buried my husband. He came to the door with a casserole dish, an actual casserole dish, Caleb like a person. And then he sat at that table and told me Michael owed him $50,000. Who? Roy Latham. He's Michael's cousin, first cousin. Their moms are sisters. She wrapped her arms around herself. Emma's called him Uncle Roy her entire life. He was at the christening. He's in the wedding photos. He's in the wedding photos. He's standing right behind Michael in the one on the mantle. Was there a loan? There was never a loan. Her voice cracked straight down the middle. Michael never borrowed a dollar from anybody in his life. That man wouldn't let me put a coffee on his brother-in-law's tab. There's no note, no transfer, no text message, nothing. Roy's got debts, sportsbook mostly, and something that went bad with a contracting thing. And when the SGLI came through and the death gratuity came through, he decided a piece of it had his name on it. You fought it. 3 times. She held up 3 fingers and they were shaking. 3 separate filings. Thrown out, thrown out, thrown out. The last judge told him if he came back a 4th time, he'd be looking at sanctions. She swallowed. That's when the letters started. Caleb went very still. Letters. 17? You kept them out. Every single one. Something hardened in her face. I'm not sentimental about it, Caleb. I kept them because a woman at the courthouse told me the only thing the system respects is paper. So I have a shoebox in my closet with 17 letters in it and 4 police report numbers and a restraining order that isn't worth the ink. What do the letters say? Sarah didn't answer. Sarah, what do the letters say? She walked out of the kitchen without a word. She came back 90 seconds later with a shoebox and set it on the table and took the lid off and didn't touch anything inside it like the contents were contaminated. The first 5 are lawyer noise, she said. Big words, no teeth. Then they change. Caleb reached in and picked one off the top of the stack. Number 14 by the pencil mark she'd put in the corner. He read 4 lines. Then he set it down flat on the table very slowly and very carefully and put both hands on the table on either side of it, and Sarah watched the color come up his neck. Read it out loud, she said. I've never heard anyone say it out loud. 14 months. I want to hear what it sounds like when it's not just in my head. Sarah, read it. Caleb picked it up. I know what time you leave for the school. I know you go the back way past the church because of the light on Princess Anne. His voice came out flat and awful. I know you're alone out there. I know nobody's coming. The kitchen was completely silent. That's letter 14, Sarah said. There's 3 more. Caleb put it down. You called the police. 4 times. They came out 4 times, very polite, very sorry, took a report every time. Her chin came up. and it was the first time Caleb had ever seen Sarah Quinn look like she wanted to break something. Do you know what they told me? Call us if something happens. That's the procedure. Nothing has technically happened. He hasn't touched us. He drives past. He parks on a public shoulder. He sends mail, which is legal, and he doesn't say a specific threat in a specific way, which is deliberate because he's not stupid, Caleb. He's the opposite of stupid. He's been careful since day one. Why didn't you tell anybody? Who, she said, and the word hit Caleb square in the chest. Michael's team rotated out. His command sent me a very nice card at Christmas. My mother's in Ohio with an oxygen tank. Sarah's voice was climbing and she couldn't stop it. And 11 men in dress blues told me anything you need, and not one of them ever called. So who exactly was I supposed to tell? Caleb couldn't look at her. That's not fair, she said immediately. I'm sorry. That's not you're here now, and it's completely fair, Caleb said. No, Sarah, it's fair. I'm not going to sit in your kitchen and let you apologize for saying a true thing. He rubbed his face. 14 months. You've been fighting a stalker alone for 14 months while I was 40 minutes down the road feeling sorry for myself. You were grieving. So were you. You just didn't get to stop making lunches. Sarah sat down across from him because her legs apparently stopped working, and for a while neither of them said anything. Then Caleb said, the tire marks out front are layered. That's not once a month. That's a pattern. It's gotten worse the last 3 weeks. Since when exactly? She thought about it, and Caleb watched her get there and watched her face change. Since the fourth filing got refused, she said slowly. The final refusal came through God 3 weeks ago Thursday, his last legal option. There's nothing left for him to file. Caleb sat back. He's out of court, he said. Yes. He's out of court, and instead of stopping, he's here more. Sarah's hand went to her mouth. Sarah, Caleb leaned forward. Listen to me very carefully because this is the only thing I'm actually good at. A man who wants money uses lawyers. When the lawyers stop working, he either quits or he stops wanting money and starts wanting leverage. He kept his voice level, which took everything he had. Putting in that box is about money anymore. Letter 14 isn't about $50,000. It's about your daughter's route to school. Sarah didn't say anything. She didn't have to. All the blood went out of her face at once. How does he know about the church? Caleb said. Sarah, how does he know you go the back way? And out in the yard, Jack came up off the grass again, ears hard forward, staring at the road, and made a sound neither of them had heard from him before. Jack was gone before the sound finished. Caleb ran 50 meters of open ground, and he had never in his life covered 50 meters so slowly, and the whole time one sentence was going through his head on a loop, flat and stupid and useless. He's been getting ready for this. He's been getting ready for this. He's been getting ready. He came around the corner of the house, and his vision collapsed to a single point. A heavy-set man in his 40s had Emma by the upper arm and was hauling her backward toward a gray pickup idling at the edge of the property with the passenger door already standing open. She wasn't going quietly. She had her heels dug into the grass, and she was twisting her whole body against the grip and screaming a word Caleb didn't process for another half second. Uncle Roy, no, Uncle Roy, stop. Sarah was coming from the garden with dirt on both hands, and the noise coming out of her wasn't language. Roy Latham looked up and saw the dog. His face did something Caleb had seen exactly twice before, both times through optics. The total structural failure of a man who has just done the math and understood that the next 4 seconds are not negotiable. Jack, Caleb's voice came out of him like a detonation. Engage. The dog went. Latham let go of Emma's arm and got both hands up, and it didn't matter because his brain had already spent the only seconds he had on being afraid. Jack hit him at the hip and turned him and put him down hard on his back, and the jaws closed on the forearm. The same forearm the man had been using to drag an 8-year-old and 90 pounds settled onto his chest and did not move. Latham screamed. It went up and cracked and turned into something without dignity in it at all. He thrashed. He swung his free hand and connected once with the side of the dog's head. Jack didn't budge. He didn't rebite, didn't shake, didn't escalate a single pound of pressure. He set his weight and held exactly the way he'd held a padded arm in a training yard 4 days earlier in front of a captain who had signed his death warrant. And his eyes weren't on the man underneath him. Caleb saw it, and it went through him like a wire. Jack's eyes were on Emma. Even with a grown man, pinned and screaming under his chest. The dog had his head turned, tracking the girl, checking, confirming, guarding the same absolute fixation he had once given a man on a beach in the Sulu Sea. Caleb arrived 4 seconds behind him. He put a knee in Latham's shoulder, took the free wrist, and folded the arm up behind the man's back until something in it complained. And every bit of 11 years came online at once. Control the threat, clear the area, get eyes on the child. Don't move, he said. Latham moved. Latham bucked and swore and tried to get a leg under himself. Jack's jaw tightened maybe a quarter of an inch. The struggling stopped so fast it was almost comic. Sarah. Caleb didn't look up. Emma, where is she? I've got her. Sarah's voice was shredded. I've got her. I've got her. She had scooped her daughter completely off the ground, both arms locked, and she was holding her so hard that Caleb could see her forearms shaking from 15 feet away. Emma wasn't screaming anymore. She was doing the other thing, the worst thing, the deep hitching, full-body sobs of a child who had just been grabbed by a man she'd been taught to call family and dragged toward an open car door and had understood at 8 years old exactly what that meant. Who is he? Caleb said, though he already knew. Roy. Sarah's voice came out of her like something being torn. Roy Latham, Michael's cousin. Michael's cousin, Caleb. That's the truck. That's the truck that's been sitting out there for 14 months. That's the letters. That's, ma'am, Latham said into the grass. Sarah, listen to me. Don't say my name. I wasn't going to hurt her. His voice was muffled and wet, and there was something obscenely reasonable in it, the tone of a man negotiating a parking space. I was never going to hurt her. I just needed you to sit down and talk to me about what I'm owed. Caleb leaned on the arm and Latham stopped talking. He looked at the man's face pressed sideways into the dirt. Round ordinary 40-something, a face you'd stand behind in line at a hardware store and felt something arrive in his chest that he had only ever felt twice in combat. Cold, precise, completely without heat. The specific fury that isn't rage at all, that's just a very quiet mechanism turning over, and the only thing standing between it and what it wanted to do was 11 years of training and a child watching from her mother's arms. Jack, Caleb said, hold. His voice came out level. That was the frightening part later when he thought about it. It came out completely level. Jack held. Not a millimeter of movement, not a fraction of extra pressure. Perfect, unwavering restraint on a man who had tried to take a child out of her own yard. The first cruiser came in 9 minutes. Caleb kept the arm locked the entire time, and Jack kept the chest pinned the entire time, and Roy Latham lay in the grass of his dead cousin's backyard and alternated between threatening to sue and asking somebody to please call an ambulance. When the deputies came around the corner, with their hands on their weapons, Caleb called it before they could. Navy, Chief Petty Officer Hayes Naval Special Warfare. Suspect is restrained, no weapon located, and this is a military working dog under my control. He will release on command, and he will not engage you. Sir, get the dog off him. Jack, out. The release was instantaneous. Jack backed off 2 steps, sat, and locked on burning, ready and completely still. And the younger deputy took an involuntary half-step backward and said, Jesus Christ. They rolled Latham and cuffed him and got him upright, and he was bleeding from the forearm, broken skin, 4 punctures, no bone, no arterial involvement. Controlled force calibrated to the ounce. The difference between a trained working dog and a weapon without a safety. That animal is dangerous, Latham said loud for the record, already building it. You saw it. That animal attacked me unprovoked. I want that on paper. Sir, you're under arrest. I'm family. I'm her uncle. Ask the kid, ask her, Emma, honey. Tell them, Uncle Roy. Emma turned her face into her mother's shoulder and did not look at him. That was the moment Caleb watched something go out of Roy Latham's face. Not remorse, calculation. The dawning understanding that the story he'd been telling himself for 14 months, family business, misunderstanding, they'll come around, had just been ruled on by an 8-year-old and had lost. The third deputy opened the pickup. Caleb watched him lean in and then stop and then straighten up very slowly and stand there for a second with his hand still on the doorframe. Sarge, what? You need to come look at this. There was a manila envelope on the passenger seat, and it was not sealed, and it was not the only one. There were 4. The deputy laid them out across the hood one at a time. Photographs, dozens. Caleb counted 41 before he stopped counting because counting had stopped being useful. The house from the road, the house from the field behind it, which meant somebody had walked on that property. Sarah's car in the lot at the grocery store on Nimmo. Sarah's car from behind at an intersection, 3 separate intersections on 3 different days. By the light. The school, the drop-off lane, the side gate, the fence along the playground taken from an angle that put the photographer inside a vehicle parked across the street. And Emma. Emma in the drop-off lane with a backpack. Emma at the fence. Emma on the front steps of her own house reading a book with a tennis ball beside her knee. Under the photographs were pages of handwriting. Times, dates. Mon 0740 Dep Back Way U752R. Wed 0738 Dep Back Way. Thurs 741 Dep Back Way. Weeks of it, months of it. A column for what days the neighbor's car was in the drive, and a column for what days it wasn't. Sarah made a sound. She had come up to the hood without anybody noticing, still holding Emma, and she was looking at a photograph of her daughter's school fence, and every bit of color drained out of her face at once. He was watching her, she said. He wasn't watching me. He was watching her. Ma'am, 14 months I filed reports about me. Her voice went up and cracked. I told you people it was about money. I told the judge it was about money. Every single time I called, I said he wants the benefits. He's harassing me over the benefits. And she stopped. I was wrong, she said. I've been wrong the entire time. Caleb put a hand on the hood because his own legs had gone unreliable. 16 pages of surveillance log. 4 envelopes. A pattern of life workup on a widow and her 8-year-old done with more discipline than half the target packages he'd been handed in his career. This was not a man who had lost his temper on a Saturday. This was a plan that had been maturing for months, and it had been sitting 400 meters from that front door the entire time. And the only reason it hadn't gone through was a dog the United States Navy had scheduled to destroy 9 days ago. Caleb thought about that number until it made him feel physically sick. 9 days. If Doyle hadn't given him the week, if Owen's page had stayed in the cabinet, if a chair hadn't been in the corridor, if a little girl hadn't sat down in the grass with her palm turned up. There was a version of that Saturday afternoon, a completely reasonable, well-documented, professionally endorsed version, where Emma Quinn got in that truck. Chief, the sergeant was looking at him. You okay? No, Caleb said. He caught the sergeant by the elbow before they loaded Latham. I want NCIS. Sir, this is county. It's kidnapping and stalking, it's ours. Listen to Caleb kept his voice low and even. The victim is the widow of a Navy lieutenant killed in action. The motive in 17 threatening letters, which she has kept all of them, and which I photographed and timestamped 4 days ago, is entitlement to that officer's SGLI payout and death gratuity. He filed on those benefits in civil court 3 separate times and lost 3 separate times. The sergeant's pen had stopped moving. He didn't come here today for money, Caleb said. He came here because the courts closed. He came for the only leverage he had left. That's a federal offense against a survivor benefit, and it puts this in NCIS jurisdiction alongside yours. And Sergeant, with respect, this family has already been failed by a record system once. I'm not letting it happen a second time because of a jurisdiction question. The sergeant looked at the photographs on the hood. I'll make the call, he said. And me? The last cruiser left a little after 7. The neighbors went home, the driveway emptied, and the house went into that particular kind of silence that only happens in houses that have just survived something, where the refrigerator sounds too loud, and nobody wants to be the first person to say a normal sentence. Caleb found Sarah in the kitchen. She was standing at the sink with both hands flat on the counter, not washing anything, not doing anything, and she was shaking so hard he could see it in her shoulders from the doorway. He didn't say anything. He walked over and lowered himself down onto the floor with his back against the cabinets, because standing up next to somebody who is barely holding is a form of pressure, and he had learned that the hard way. Jack followed him in and lay down between them. Sarah looked down at a seal sitting on her kitchen floor, and a dog with his head on the tile, and whatever she'd been holding on to for 14 months finally completely gave out. She slid down the cabinet until she was sitting beside him. Her shoulder touched his. Jack shifted and put his chin on her knee, and she pushed her hand into his fur and broke. Not loudly. It was worse than loud. It was the deep, hitching, silent kind that comes from a place words don't reach. I've been fighting him alone, she got out. 14 months. The letters, the court, the police, all of it, and I never told a single person, and you want to know why? Tell me. Because Michael would have handled it in one conversation. Her breath caught. He would have driven over there and knocked on that door and stood on the step, and that would have been the end of it. Not because he was violent. Michael never raised his hand to anybody in his life. Because he was the kind of man who made you understand there were consequences just by standing there. She pressed her face into the dog's neck. And Michael's not here. So I thought that meant I had to be him. And I couldn't, so I just didn't tell anybody. You don't have to be him. I was so tired, Caleb. I know. No, you don't. She said it without any heat at all, which made it worse. You went into a hole. That's allowed. Men get to do that. Everybody understands it. They say he's grieving, and they bring a lasagna. I couldn't go in a hole. I had a kid who needed a lunch and a bus and a bedtime story, and somebody had to keep answering the phone when the lawyer called. She laughed, and it came apart in the middle. Do you know what I did the night of the funeral? I did laundry. Everybody left, and I stood in my dress and folded a load of her school clothes because it was Tuesday. Caleb sat there and let it be true. You were right, he said, about what I did. I did go in a hole. I shouldn't have. Sarah, I was 40 minutes away. His throat closed and he pushed through it. 14 months. And the thing that finally got me in a truck was a dog they were going to put down. That's the whole story. There's no better version of it. Then be here now, she said. That's it. That's all I want. Nobody's asking you to fix 14 months. Emma came into the doorway. She stood there for a second, her mother crying on the kitchen floor, a grown man sitting beside her. The dog between them, and she didn't look frightened by it, and she didn't look away. She crossed the room and sat down on the other side of Jack. She put her small hand on top of her mother's, where it was buried in the dog's fur, and laced her fingers through. We're okay, Mom, she said. Jack kept us safe. Sarah pulled her in so hard, the dog got squeezed between them and Jack, who had put 3 handlers in medical, who had chewed through a reinforced muzzle in 3 minutes 40, who had been 9 days from a needle, just adjusted his weight and let it happen. NCIS came Monday morning. Special Agent Nolan Price had a face that gave away exactly nothing, and Special Agent Maya Cortez carried a tablet like a scalpel and asked questions the way a surgeon makes an incision precisely, deeply, and without apologizing for it. Sarah sat at her kitchen table and compressed 14 months into 90 minutes of testimony, and by the end of it, both agents had stopped writing at various points, which Caleb understood was not a good sign for the person they'd be arresting. It had started 3 weeks after the funeral. Latham at the door with a casserole dish. The claim of a $50,000 loan with no note, no transfer, no message, nothing. 3 civil filings, 3 dismissals, a judge threatening sanctions. Then the letters. Cortez read one aloud. She read it in a completely flat voice, and it was somehow worse that way. And when she got to the line about the back route past the church, Caleb watched Nolan Price stop moving entirely for about 2 seconds. Mrs. Quinn, Price said, you reported this 4 times. And they took reports. Sarah's hands were around a coffee mug she never lifted. They were kind. They were genuinely kind. Nobody was rude to me. They told me to call if something happened. Her chin came up. Something happened. He tried to take my daughter out of my backyard, and the only reason she's in the next room right now instead of in the back of his truck is a dog this Navy was 9 days from destroying. The kitchen was quiet for a long moment. Ma'am, Price said, I've been doing this 19 years. I want to be straight with you about something, and then I want to be straight with you about something else. He set his pen down. The first thing is that the response you got was procedurally correct. Every officer who came out here did what the system told them to do. I know. The second thing is that the system was wrong. He held her eyes. The letters and the drive-bys read as harassment, and harassment gets a report. The surveillance package in that truck reads as an abduction workup, and that would have gotten a task force. Same man, same 14 months. The only difference is nobody looked in the vehicle until Saturday. Sarah put a hand over her mouth. So what happens to him, Caleb said. Held without bail as of this morning, Cortez said. The magistrate saw the photographs. The surveillance logs established premeditation over a documented period of not less than 11 weeks, and there's an unsealed envelope in that truck with a printed map of a rest stop off 168 and a phone number on it that we are extremely interested in. Caleb's head came up. A rest stop. We're not going to speculate about that in this kitchen, Price said, and the way he said it told Caleb everything he did not want to know. Mrs. Quinn, you'll have a victim advocate assigned by end of day. The protective order becomes federal. And I want to tell you plainly, this man will not be released pending trial. That is not a comfort I offer people often. At the door, Price stopped and looked down at Jack, who had spent the entire 90 minutes lying at Sarah's feet with his ears turning toward her every time her voice wavered. That's the dog. That's the dog, Caleb said. They had a disposition order on him. 9 days out. Price looked at the animal a while longer. Chief, he said, you understand what I'm going to have to put in my report. That the outcome of a federal kidnapping attempt turned on a canine asset that was scheduled for behavioral euthanasia. He shook his head slowly. Somebody upstairs is going to read that paragraph twice. The trial took 6 weeks to get there and 1 day to end. Sarah testified. Caleb testified. A deputy testified about the contents of a truck. And an 8-year-old girl testified by video from a room with a beanbag chair in it and a stuffed rabbit in her lap. And she described in the plain, unadorned language children use for things adults have to build sentences around: being grabbed by the arm by a man she had been taught to call uncle, and being pulled toward a car with the door already open. The judge asked her one question at the end. Is there anything else you want to say? Emma thought about it. I was at my dad's funeral, she said. He wore a black tie and he hugged me. Guilty on all counts: attempted kidnapping, stalking, violation of a protective order, interstate transmission of threats, 10 years. The judge handed down the maximum without visible hesitation and said on the record that in 22 years on the bench, he had rarely seen a course of conduct so patient or so deliberate, and that in his view, the only thing that had prevented a homicide investigation was the presence by pure accident of timing of a trained military working dog. Caleb sat in the second row and heard the words pure accident of timing and thought no. A folding chair, a page in a cabinet, a little girl in the grass with her palm turned up. There was nothing accidental about it at all. 3 weeks after the verdict, Caleb stood in Captain Doyle's office for the third time. This time he hadn't asked for the meeting. Sit down, Chief. He sat. Naval Special Warfare is documenting the rehabilitation of MWD Jack as a model case, Doyle said. Behavioral science reviewed the entire timeline. The regression, the aggression profile, the failure of 2 pharmacological protocols, and then complete functional recovery in 8 days by non-standard means. He tapped a folder. They want it built into the handler pipeline, command-wide. Caleb stared at him. Sir, there's a term of art in the draft. Doyle's mouth did something that was almost a smile. Presence-based decompression, which is, as far as I can tell, the 9-syllable way of saying sit down and shut up and wait. That's about right, sir. They're calling it the Hayes Protocol. Caleb was quiet for a second. It shouldn't be named after me, sir. Chief, with respect. He leaned forward. It should be named after an 8-year-old girl who sat down in the grass and told a war dog it was okay to be sad. And after Senior Chief Brady, who wrote the entire method down on a training log 9 days before he died and had it filed in a cabinet that everybody walked past for 6 weeks. Doyle looked at him for a long moment. I read that page, he said. Keller brought it to me. He asked me to note in his record that he was the one who filed it. Did you? I told him if I started recording every piece of paper this command has failed to read, I'd need a bigger safe. Doyle sat back. The Brady Quinn Protocol. That's what I'll send up. They'll fight me on the civilian name. Then fight them, sir. I intend to. He slid an envelope across the desk. And the base commander would like to send this to the family. Formal recognition letterhead, the whole apparatus. Caleb picked it up. She won't understand why it's a big deal, he said. She'll say she didn't do anything. Then you'll explain it to her, Doyle said. That's the job now, Chief. That's been the job the whole time. He tried to explain it on a Saturday on the porch with the letter in his hands and the pod lying between them, and it went about as well as he'd expected. Emma listened to the whole thing. Official Navy letterhead, the base commander's signature. Language is about extraordinary contribution to the rehabilitation of a military working asset and to the operational readiness of naval special warfare. When he finished, she frowned. I didn't do anything, though. Emma. I sat down. She said it like she was correcting a math error. That's not a thing. Anybody can sit down. Caleb set the letter on the step and got off the chair and went down on one knee so he was level with her. Listen to me, he said. Every handler on that base tried to reach him with technique. 20, 30, 40 years of experience between them. They used every tool the United States Navy owns: command structure, correction, medication, isolation, enrichment, all of it. And he fought every single one of them, and he won. Because he was scared. Because he was scared, Caleb said. And you reached him by sitting in the grass and telling him it was okay to be sad. That's not, you didn't try to fix him, he said. That's the whole thing, Emma. Everybody else walked into that yard with a plan for what he was supposed to turn into. You walked in with nothing and let him know he wasn't alone. His voice went, that's not nothing. That's everything. And 9 days after that, he was standing between a man and you. Emma looked down at Jack. The dog looked back at her with an expression Caleb had watched develop over 11 weeks and still didn't have a word for total, unhurried, permanent. A trust so complete it had stopped being an emotion and become a structural feature. Dad taught me that, she said quietly. Taught you what? He said warriors don't need to be fixed. They need to be seen. She scratched the base of Jack's ear. I didn't really know what it meant. I just did it because he said it. Caleb couldn't answer. His throat had closed completely. Sarah behind the screen door said, Okay, both of you inside before I have to explain to the neighbors why 3 people are crying on my porch on a Saturday. Han deployed 11 weeks later. It was a hard conversation and he handled the first half of it badly. He told Sarah on a Tuesday in the kitchen, in the flat, administrative voice menus when they're trying to make a thing smaller than it is. Workup complete dog, certified units, short of detection asset, 4 months, maybe 5. Sarah stood at the counter and heard all of it and didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, say it like a person. Sarah, you just gave me the brief. I got the brief for 11 years. She turned around. I'm not asking you not to go. I would never ask you that, and you know it. I'm asking you to say it to me like I'm somebody who matters instead of somebody you're managing. Caleb put both hands on the back of a chair. I'm leaving in 9 days, he said. I don't want to. That's the part I couldn't figure out how to say because I've never not wanted to go before in my life, and I don't know what to do with that. Sarah's eyes went bright. There it is, she said. I'll be back in the spring. You'll be back when you're back. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist, annoyed at herself. Don't put a season on it. Michael used to put a season on it, and then the season would come and go, and I'd have to reset my whole nervous system. Just come back. Okay. And Caleb, she stopped him at the door. You tell her yourself, not a note, not from me. She gets told to her face by the person leaving because that's the only version of this that doesn't teach her that people just disappear. He told Emma that afternoon on the back steps. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked one question which was not the question he'd braced for. Does Jack go? Jack goes. Okay. Her chin was doing something. Then that's better than if you went by yourself. Emma. No, I mean it. She wiped her nose on her sleeve. Because if you're alone and something happens, there's nobody. If he's there, there's somebody. She looked at him very seriously. That's how it worked with my dad and Ranger, except then it didn't. Caleb had to put his hand over his mouth for a second. I'm going to bring him home, he said. And me. That's a promise, and I don't make those anymore, so you should probably write it down. I'm going to hold you to it. I want you to. She thought about it. Can I have a job, she said, while you're gone? What kind of job? I'll take care of his bowl. Her voice wobbled and she pushed straight through it, and Caleb thought, God, you are your father's daughter. It stays by the table. I'll wash it every Sunday, even though it's clean. So when he comes back, it's ready, and he doesn't have to wonder. That's a good job. It's a real job, Emma said. It's not pretend. No, Caleb said. It's not pretend. The deployment was 4 months and 11 days, and he came back with 2 things he hadn't left with. The first was a hand that shook in the mornings for about 90 seconds after waking, which the corpsman said was fatigue, and which Caleb privately filed under something else. The second was a certainty about the dog that he would spend the rest of his career failing to explain to anybody who hadn't seen it. Jack found 2 devices, not 2, on the deployment 2 in the first 11 days. A pressure plate under packed dirt at a compound entrance that would have taken the point man and probably the 2 behind him and a secondary in a culvert, 800 meters up the same route, which was the one that told Caleb the man who'd laid them had thought about the day. He tracked a squirter, 19 kilometers over broken ground on a night so black that the optics were more of an opinion than a picture. And on a rooftop in a valley whose name Caleb would never be able to say out loud in a kitchen, an interpreter dropped a metal ammunition can from about chest height onto concrete 4 feet behind Jack's head. Caleb's entire body went cold. Jack's ears came back. His head turned. He looked at the can. He looked at the interpreter who had gone white and was apologizing in 2 languages at once. And then he looked at Caleb. Just checked in. 1 second, maybe less. You good? We good. Caleb said, we're good, bud. And the dog turned around and went back to work, and Caleb sat down on an ammunition crate 10 minutes later, with his hands over his face while his team lead very carefully found something else to look at. He wrote it up that night. He wrote it up in detail, and he sent it to Keller, and Keller sent it up the chain, and 8 weeks later, it appeared as an annex in the training material with a paragraph number and no names in it at all. He landed on a Thursday and drove straight to Pungo. He didn't go to debrief. He didn't drop his gear. He signed the dog out, put him in the passenger seat of a truck that smelled like 4 months of sitting, and got on 264 South with 16 hours of flight still in his bones. Jack knew where they were going. That was the thing Caleb would tell people about for years afterward, and nobody ever quite believed it. 2 miles out, 2 miles before the mailbox, before the turn, before anything. A human being would recognize. The dog's ears came up off his head, and his tail started going, and a sound came out of his chest that was not a growl, and not a whine, and not anything Caleb had a name for. Just a soft, urgent huff. The noise of an animal who has associated a specific stretch of asphalt with the only place on earth that has never once asked anything of him. Yeah, Caleb said. His voice was doing something. Yeah, I know. Almost there. He turned into the driveway. Emma was on the porch. She was taller. 4 months and she was noticeably taller. And that detail landed on Caleb harder than anything that had happened in the valley, because it was the first honest evidence he'd had that the world back here had kept moving without him in it. Her book went off her lap onto the boards. She didn't run. She came down the steps, unhurried, the deliberate approach her father had drilled into her before she could read, respecting a working dog's space while making it completely clear that the space belonged to him too. Jack met her halfway and nearly knocked her over. He drove his head into her neck, and his whole body was shaking. Not fear, not grief, the third thing, the thing Caleb had never once seen in an animal before that yard, and his tail was hammering the ground hard enough to hear. You came back, Emma said into his fur. I told Mom. I told her Jack always comes back now. Caleb stood by the truck with a duffel over one shoulder and lost it completely. 4 months of controlled breathing and disciplined emotion and combat-grade composure, and the thing that took him apart was a kid hugging a dog in a driveway. Sarah came out onto the porch. She looked different, and it took him a second to work out how. Not younger, not rested exactly. The permanent operational alertness that had been sharpening her features since the funeral, the thing that had made her check the road every time a car passed, had gone out of her. You look terrible, she said. You look like you've been sleeping. 14 months and 4, Sarah said. First time. Get inside, you're leaking on my driveway. The house smelled like coffee and something baking, and Caleb sat down at Michael Quinn's kitchen table, the same table where Sarah had given testimony to 2 federal agents, the same table where she told him surviving was the harder job, and wrapped both hands around a mug and let the last 4 months slide a little further away than they actually were. How was it? Sarah said. Clean. Good team. He turned the mug. Jack was... He stopped. How was perfect, Sarah? Every single time. 2 devices in the first 2 weeks. 19 clicks on a track in the dark. And a guy dropped an ammo can 4 feet behind him on a rooftop, and he checked in with me. His voice cracked on it. He looked at the noise, and then he looked at me, and then he went back to work. 4 months ago, that noise would have put me on my back with his teeth in my face. He trusts you. It's more than that. Caleb shook his head. He decided the noise wasn't his problem to solve alone. That's not obedience. There's no protocol that makes a dog do that. There's one, Sarah said. It's got my daughter's name on it. The Brady Quinn Protocol, Caleb said. It went command-wide in March. They're teaching it at Lackland now. Sarah set her cup down. Say that again. They're teaching it at Lackland. 4 dogs so far. 2 of them came off disposition lists. He watched her face. The first one's a Malinois out of a unit in Colorado. Handler died in a vehicle rollover. They gave the dog 8 weeks of the chair method, and he's certified last month. Sarah put her hand over her mouth. That's a dog that would be dead, she said. That's a dog that would be dead. Because Michael wrote a sentence in a notebook, and Owen wrote it on a form. And because an 8-year-old sat down in the grass, Caleb said. Sarah, there's a slide. In the actual course material, it's a photograph of a folding chair. Sarah laughed, and then her eyes spilled over, and she waved a hand at her own face like she was embarrassed by it. God, he would have been insufferable, she said. Michael, absolutely insufferable. He'd have printed it on a shirt. He'd have worn the shirt to the commissary. He'd have worn the shirt to church. She laughed until it turned into the other thing, and Caleb sat there and let her, because he had finally, at 35 years old, learned that sometimes the entire job is to not fix it. Emma came in with the dog at her hip and climbed into the chair beside her mother and looked at Caleb with an expression that had a question loaded in it. Did you bring it? Caleb reached into his jacket. He put a photograph on the table. It had been taken at a forward operating base by a kid from the platoon with a phone printed on the base's terrible printer colors, slightly wrong. Caleb and Cammy's down on one knee. Jack beside him in the coyote brown harness, ears forward, eyes sharp, canine Jack clear across the panel. And behind them a sunset doing something completely unreasonable with the sky because beauty doesn't check the security clearance of the places it decides to show up. For your collection, Caleb said. Emma picked it up with both hands. She studied it the way children study things that matter completely, without dividing her attention, the way adults forget how to do somewhere around 25. Then she slid off the chair and walked into the living room, and Sarah and Caleb followed her, and Jack followed all of them. There were 2 frames on the mantel. The first was Lieutenant Michael Quinn in uniform with Ranger, sitting at his left knee, both of them squared away, both of them carrying the unmistakable bearing of a man and a dog, about to walk into whatever the tasking required. The second was Emma sitting in the grass with a German shepherd's head in her lap, taken through a screen door on a morning in June, by a woman who had been sitting on her own hallway floor with her hand over her face. It was badly framed. It was slightly out of focus. It was the single most important photograph in that house. Emma set the new one down beside them. Then she stepped back and looked at all 3. There, she said. Now it's finished. Sarah pressed her hand against her mouth. Caleb looked at the ceiling because looking anywhere else would have ended him. That evening, he sat on the porch with the dog at his feet and the sounds of dinner coming through the screen plates. The tap running, a mother and a daughter arguing amiably about whether corn counted as a vegetable. Jack put on Caleb's boot. Same position, exactly the same position as that day in the dirt when he'd crawled 20 feet across a yard on his belly with his whole body shaking. No shaking now. You know what he'd say if he could see you, Caleb said. The dog's ear tipped. He'd say, about damn time, you stubborn mutt. Been waiting 8 weeks for you to figure it out. Caleb scratched the spot between his ears. And then he'd take credit for the whole thing. He'd be telling that story at every command function for the next 20 years, and it'd get worse every time. Jack huffed through his nose. His tail went once against the boards. Caleb sat with that a while. I thought about Owen and Brady, who had written the instructions on a training log 9 days before he died and never known that anyone would read them. He thought about Michael Quinn, who had taught a girl to sit down and be quiet with frightened animals, and had no idea he was building the thing that would eventually stand between his daughter and a truck with an open door. He thought about Danny Vega, who had taken 23 stitches and then said, "Don't let my arm be the reason." About Grant Keller, who had filed the page and had asked months later for it to go in his record. Every single one of them had done a small thing that hadn't looked like anything at the time, and every single one of those small things had turned out to be load-bearing. Hey, Caleb put his hand flat on the dog's shoulder. You weren't saved by training. You understand that? Not by commands, not by a protocol, not by a drug, not by anybody with a clipboard or a certification or 19 years of experience. Jack's eyes came up. Those eyes. Caleb still couldn't look at them for too long. 11 weeks ago, they had been all pupil and no light, running a threat assessment on the whole world at once. And now there was something in them that was warm and unhurried and absolutely permanent. "You were saved by a little girl who sat down in the grass," Caleb said, "and told you it was okay to stop fighting. The tail went once. Once was enough. It had always been enough." The screen door opened. "Dinner," Emma said. "Mom says you have to eat at the table like a human being." Caleb smiled. It was small and it was real, and it cost him something. He'd been rationing them so long, he'd nearly forgotten they were free. "Tell your mom I'll be right in." He looked down. "Can Jack?" "He has a bowl." Emma gave him a look. Michael Quinn's look, the one that said obviously without spending a single word on it. "He's had a bowl since the second week. I wash it every Sunday." "Where have you been?" She disappeared inside. Caleb looked at the dog. The man looked at Caleb. "Apparently you live here now," he said. Jack got up, shook himself once from the ears down, and walked to the door. He paused there and looked back, patient, steady, waiting the way he'd waited at 10,000 doors on 3 continents for a man to catch up. Caleb followed him in. The rest of it happened the way real life happens, which is to say slowly and without announcement. Caleb kept coming on his Saturdays, and then on Saturdays and Wednesdays, and then it stopped being a schedule and became the shape of a week. He fixed the gutter. He taught Emma to throw a proper spiral because she asked, and because Michael had apparently been terrible at it, and she'd been carrying that grudge for years. He sat at that table so many nights that his mug developed a permanent location. Whatever was growing between him and Sarah grew the way things grow when nobody is forcing them. It was not urgent. It had no electricity in it, and neither of them wanted any. It was built out of shared ground and mutual respect and the specific rare trust of 2 people who had walked through the same darkness at different times and come out into the same light and had nothing left to perform for each other. It took its time. It was allowed to. Danny Vega came out for a cookout in October with the scar showing on his forearm and got knocked flat by 90 pounds of German Shepherd who remembered him and then had to sit down on the steps for a minute because it turned out he'd been carrying that for 8 months too. Keller retired the following spring at 20 years, and at his ceremony he said in front of 200 people that the most important thing he'd done in his career was hand a man a harness and then write down what happened next. And Grant Keller took the folding chair with him. He'd asked for it. It was, he said, the only piece of government property he'd ever wanted. Roy Latham served his sentence in a federal facility in Pennsylvania. He wrote to Sarah twice in the first year. She did not open either letter. She turned both over to the victim, advocate unopened, and the second one earned him a disciplinary hearing and a note in his file. And after that, the letter stopped. The protective order was permanent. For the first time since a folded flag was placed in her hands, Sarah Quinn could lock her front door at night and believe that it was enough. Man. 2 years on, there were 4 photographs on the mantle. The 4th was taken at a change of command ceremony, and it was crowded and badly lit and slightly crooked. And in it, a Navy SEAL in dress blue stood beside a German Shepherd in a coyote brown harness, while a girl of 10 read a citation off a card in front of 140 people without stumbling once. The citation was for the dog. The name on the protocol was Brady Quinn, and it had gone command-wide, and by then there were 19 working dogs alive who would not otherwise have been. 19 dogs and behind, each of them a handler, and behind each handler a team, and none of them would ever know that the entire thing came down to a page in a cabinet. Nobody read a man who sat in a folding chair instead of reaching, and an 8-year-old girl who put her palm flat on the ground because that was what her father had shown her before she could read. They said Jack couldn't be tamed. They were right. He never was. I was never a problem that needed solving, never a mechanism that needed correcting, never a piece of equipment that needed to be made convenient again. He was a soldier who had lost the only person he trusted, and every expert who walked into that kennel walked in trying to fix him, and the one person who reached him walked in with nothing at all and sat down in the grass and let him know he wasn't alone. That is the whole secret. There isn't a bigger one underneath it. Warriors don't need to be fixed. They need to be seen. And sometimes the most powerful force on this earth isn't strength or speed or tactical precision or 30 years of institutional expertise. Sometimes it's a child sitting in the grass with her hand open telling a broken warrior that it's okay to stop fighting and meaning it.